India is the sixth largest economy on Earth. Its people rank 149th. Same country, same year, same spreadsheet. $4.15 trillion of output and $2,813 per person. Sixth place and 149th place, sitting next to each other in the same IMF table. Here's what makes it stranger. India is the fastest growing major economy in the world. It has been for years. 6.5% this year. 7.6% last year. Nobody else in the top 10 comes close. And in the same 12 months, India fell in the rankings. Everyone spent last year saying India would pass Japan and take fourth place. It didn't. It's sixth. And the reason it's sixth has almost nothing to do with anything that happened in an Indian factory or an Indian field. You've been told India is the next China. It isn't. It's something the world has never actually seen before. A country that built $1 trillion economy while skipping the one stage every rich country used to get rich. Let me show you how that happened and who's paying for it. Start with the fall from 4th to 6th because it tells you what these numbers really are. Two things happened. First, the rupee weakened from about 84.5 to the dollar to 88.5. Second, in February, India's own statistics agency changed the base year of its national accounts from 2011 to 2022. Standard housekeeping. Every country does it. Between them, those two things cut roughly 4% off India's dollar GDP. Nothing was produced less. No factory closed. No worker was laid off. A currency moved and an accountant updated a reference year, and a country slid past two rivals in the world rankings. That should tell you something about the number everyone argues about. Now the other side of it. Take that $4.15 trillion and divide it by 1.4 billion people. You get $2,813 a year, $234 a month. That's the average Indian income. Except the average Indian doesn't exist. This is the single most important thing to understand about India, so I'm going to give it a name and use it for the rest of this video. The phantom average. It's what happens when you take a number from the top of an economy and a number from the bottom, add them, and divide by everyone, and get a person who lives nowhere. In a country where incomes cluster tightly, an average tells you about a real household. In India, incomes don't cluster. They fan out so wide that the midpoint describes almost nobody. Let me show you what's actually underneath it. Line up 100 Indians in order of income. Here's how the money splits. One person at the top takes 30% of all the income in the line. 1. They make around 1.5 lakh a month. Call it $1,700. The next 14 people take another 30% between them. That's about 20,000 rupees a month each, $225. The next 30 people take another 30%, 8,000 rupees a month, $90. And the last 55 people, more than half the line, split what's left, 10%, 1,500 rupees a month each, $17. $17 a month in the sixth largest economy on the planet. Now think about what that does to a business. Bloom Ventures ran the numbers on who in India actually has money left after the essentials. The answer, about 130 to 140 million people, roughly 1 in 10. They call it India 1. That 10% generates 2/3 of all the discretionary spending in the entire country. Behind them sit around 300 million more who are starting to spend, cautiously, mostly because digital payments made it easy. And behind them sit about 1 billion people who, from the point of view of anyone selling a phone or a car or a plane ticket, may as well not be there. So when a Western company says, "We're entering a market of 1.4 billion consumers," what they've actually entered is a market of 140 million, with 1 billion people standing behind it in the photograph. It gets more literal than that. In India's 50 biggest cities, roughly 40% of households now live in gated communities. And those households account for more than half of all consumption in those cities. India 1 doesn't just earn separately. It lives behind a wall, shops behind a wall, and increasingly gets sold to behind a wall. One more number, and this one is the quiet one. In 2023, consumption per Indian was about $1,493 a year. China hit that level in 2010. India isn't a decade behind China in growth rate. It's a decade behind in what an ordinary person can afford to buy. Here's the part almost nobody explains, and it's the actual answer to the question in the title. Every country that got rich in the last 200 years climbed the same staircase. Britain, Germany, Japan, Korea, Taiwan, China. Farms, then factories, then services. In that order. Every single time. The factory step isn't optional decoration. It's the engine, and it works for a very specific reason. Take a man who has spent his life farming a small plot with his hands. He has maybe 6 years of schooling. On that plot, his output is tiny and it depends on rain. Now put him on an assembly line making shoes. In 6 months, without a degree, without English, without a laptop, he produces 5 to 10 times more value per day than he did in the field. And someone pays him for it on a fixed date with a payslip. That's the escalator. It takes tens of millions of people with no education and lifts them, fast, in 1 generation. It's how 600 million Chinese left poverty. It's ugly, it's exhausting, and it's the only mechanism that has ever moved that many people that quickly. India stepped off the escalator. It went from farms to services. Software, call centers, back offices, finance, design. Services now make up close to 60% of India's economic output. Indian IT exports passed $100 billion. Those are real achievements. India built a genuinely world-class industry from nothing. But look at who's on it. India's IT sector employs somewhere around 5 million people. India's labor force is about 610 million. Software is an elevator, not an escalator. It goes very high, very fast, and it fits about 8 people at a time. You need English, a degree, and usually a family that could afford to keep you in school until 22. If you're one of the 55 people at the back of our line of 100, no software boom in history was ever going to reach you. Meanwhile, the factory steps stayed empty. Manufacturing has been stuck at roughly 17% of India's economy, and by the narrow definition, closer to 13.5%. Manufacturing employs about 12% of Indian workers. Make in India launched in 2014 with a target, 25% of GDP, by 2022. Then the deadline moved to 2025. In the latest budget, the National Manufacturing Mission carries the same 25% target, with a new date attached, 2035. Same number. 3 deadlines, 21 years apart. This is where the phantom average turns into something you can see on the ground. 44% of Indian workers are still in agriculture. Agriculture produces about 18% of output. Nearly half the workforce, splitting less than 1/5 of the pie. That gap is the poverty. Over 80% of Indian workers are in the informal economy, unregistered employers. No contract, no pension, no unemployment insurance, no payslip. When you hear that Indian unemployment is under 5%, that's what's holding the number down. Almost everyone is doing something. It just doesn't pay. Then there's who isn't working at all. India's labor force participation rate is about 40%. Female participation is around 23%, one of the lowest figures of any large economy on Earth. Half the population, mostly outside the paid economy entirely. And here's what the growth does when the escalator is missing. It goes to the top and stops there. Businesses aren't stupid. If 10% of your customers control 2/3 of the spending, you stop making cheap things for everyone and start making expensive things for them. Economists call it premiumization. Luxury apartments instead of starter flats. Flagship phones instead of budget ones. The market doesn't widen. It just gets richer at the top. Growth without the factory step doesn't spread outward. It stacks upward. And there's a clock on this. India's demographic dividend, the window where it has far more working age people than dependents, is open now. It closes. Every country gets one. Japan spent its dividend building Toyota. Korea spent its building Samsung and Hyundai. If India reaches the end of its window with 80% of workers still informal, it will be the first large country in history to grow old before it grew rich. Now let me argue the opposite, properly, because the pessimist version of this story is also wrong. First, the rankings I opened with are one way of counting, and not the kindest one. Adjust for what money actually buys inside India, purchasing power parity. And India is the third largest economy in the world at nearly $19 trillion, and its per-person figure jumps from 149th to 119th. Still low, but a very different picture. Second, the poverty numbers moved, and they moved a lot. Extreme poverty in India is now around 5% of the population. 2 generations ago, the overwhelming majority of the country lived there. Third, India built something no other developing country has: digital public infrastructure. Identity, payments, and banking, national scale, near free. UPI moves more transactions per month than most countries do in a year. A vegetable seller with no credit history now has a payment record, and a payment record is the first step to a loan. And fourth, the growth is real. 7.6% in the last fiscal year isn't an accounting artifact. Industrial production hit a 2-year high in December. Manufacturing may be climbing that step slowly, but it is climbing. The honest version isn't India is failing. India is doing something genuinely unprecedented, building a modern economy on a foundation the textbook says can't hold one. The open question isn't whether India grows. It's whether growth reaches the 55 people at the back of the line or stops at the wall of the gated community. So back to the 2 numbers. 6th in the world. 149th per person. Both are true. They're not a contradiction, and they're not a statistical trick. They're a description of a country where the economy and the people are climbing at different speeds, on different equipment, and one of them stepped off the escalator 30 years ago. 6th place is where India's economy lives. 149th is where Indians live. And until the step between them gets built, the average Indian will stay exactly what he is today, a number with nobody standing on it. Subscribe. Next time we're taking apart the country that did climb the staircase and what it cost them to do it.